Good afternoon, guys, gals, and non-binary pals, and welcome to another edition of Blether, Thegither, your weekly breakdown of news and politics from Scotland and around the world. Joining me in the studio today is our regular Angela Haggerty from Common Space, and Suzanne McGlaughlin, a political commentator and the owner of the Yes Bar in Glasgow.
Hello, hi.
Or is that how you want to be known? Or?
Yes,
yeah,
perfect.
Yes Bar, which is a comedy club now, as I found out the other night.
Only for about 3 years.
Yeah,
you know,
I
your
know.
finger on the pulse.
That's amazing. Right? I'm amazed I'm so far behind. So yeah, thank you for tuning in today. We will be chatting about everything that's happened over the last week, but as always we do want to hear your comments throughout as well, and we will be watching them, so please do leave them down below. Hello to Richard, Sharon and Alistair, and also Ian, who've already said hi to us. Thanks for getting in there.
Hello.
First, guys, and if you want to help us reach a larger audience, as always, please do give us a wee share out. So this week, it's been general election mania. We've kind of like really just went for it. Like, pretty head on. We've already had Willie Rennie have a weird incident at a farm. We've already seen Ruth Davidson riding on things. Like, I mean, this is it. It's just classic general election
Deja
now.
vu, really.
Yeah, it's the same thing all over again. I don't know. Have you been finding it, Suzanne?
I think the general election is a wee bit of in some ways, in some hands, I'm like, it's a wee bit of an irrelevance, because I actually think these council elections are massively important. I don't think we can underestimate how important it is that Labour is the last stronghold, and if we manage to topple them from Glasgow, then it's a good thing. But then on the other hand, I'm all about sending a strong message to the Tories that they're not wanted here at all. So, and like you say, it's been a wee bit same old, isn't it? And we were just saying a second ago, like, how long till Brown's wheeled out again, and it's, yeah, and Ruth driving on things, but I wonder if this is going to backfire on Theresa May just a little bit. I think it might. I think they've underestimated a little. They've overplayed their hand in Scotland. This facile that was made up that Ruth Davidson, as you said the other day, the Ruth Davidson party, that's slipping, the mass slipping, the dripping with blood, vampire teeth are starting to show. You know, she's, with what's happened this week in Holyrood, the rape clause. She's changing. She's starting to look like a woman, Ruth Davidson, that's a wee bit scared.
And do you think the council elections are being overlooked at the moment?
Oh, of course they're being overlooked. It's difficult enough to get people to be interested in council elections. We know that. You call a general election just a few weeks before and you've got absolutely no chance. So I think it's a shame, because what we've got now is two important elections. Local council stuff is important. This is people's everyday lives, communities, and a general election, of course, dealing with massive issues. And both of these elections are about the same things, and they're both about constitutional questions, just slightly different ones. So it's Brexit really for the majority of the UK probably, and in Scotland it's all aimed at Scottish independence, and you have some kind of movement in between those two constitutional questions, for like example in the north of Ireland, where they've got their own constitutional stuff to be thinking about long term, the Good Friday Agreement, all these things. This is really what's driving people's votes, rather than the issues that is actually, you know, the things that are affecting them in their daily lives right now, like low pay, 0 hours contracts, benefit cuts, all of these things. That's all been kicked into the long grass, and that to me is the greatest shame about these elections, is that all of the really important stuff in people's everyday lives is going to be pretty much lost, and it's going to be all about national questions. Now, as a Scottish independence supporter, shock, revelation, I think that, you know, one of the things that got people to come over to Scottish independence who had otherwise been sceptical was the fact that it wasn't a nationalist thing. Yeah. It wasn't all about nationalism. It was about internationalism. It was about looking outward. It was about all of these things, and it still is that. Scottish nationalism has almost been an exception, given what's going on in other parts of the world, and really showing a different way of doing things. However, I still think that there's a growing discomfort from the fact that people, regardless of that, can see that these national questions are now dominating politics. And as much as I think a lot of people, maybe on the Scottish nationalist side or slightly other sides, maybe more traditional Labour supporters, might be looking at the likes of Ruth Davidson and thinking, yeah, the mask's slipping, particularly over the rape clause. I think there's going to be other people that, if it's going to go down nationalist constitutional lines, I think we're going to start to see some movement in Scotland that none of us even 5 years ago would have predicted that we would see. So I don't know. yes, the mask may be slipping a little bit from Ruth Davidson, but that's not really what it's all about. And I think that we are going to see an increase in the Tory vote in Scotland. It's just a question of how that's actually going to translate into seats. Because, of course, it's first past the post vote system. It's not proportional representation like we have in our elections.
I mean, we've definitely said in the show a bunch of times before now that all, from the 3 years now since the independence referendum, we've slowly seen all politics starting to be viewed through a constitutional lens. And in a way, I think this general election, which is just obviously a snap one, but it's kind of reached, I don't think it can go any further. Like, we've reached the maximum constitutional lens, where I think some of the flyers being given out by the Tory party now doesn't mention a single Tory party policy on it. It's just like 5 reasons why independence will never work. And you're like, this has nothing to do with this election. And same with the Labour Party flyers coming out at the moment as well. It's for the local elections. It's vote in Labour councillors because we oppose the second referendum. It has nothing to do with a referendum. We're talking about local elections just now. Everything's being framed through that constitutional lens to the point now where it is all meaningless. Like, there's no content coming out. It's just space being filled with kind of platitudes about the union to see who can, I think, when it comes to the Conservatives and the Labour Party, who can out-union the other one to try and maintain that support. Because we have seen the support slip away from the Labour Party towards the Conservatives. And I think that is down to this cuddly Conservative image that Ruth Davidson has managed to maintain for a little while, which, as we're talking about, could be beginning to slip with the rate clause and the family cap and the kind of really awful performance in Holyrood this week during the rate clause debate, where she stood up and spoke and took no interventions and just lectured about why the rate clause was the right decision to have made, and almost blamed it on the deficit and saying that we've got to look after our finances, which is why we have to implement this like horrendous application of bureaucracy.
I think that the SNP though, and supporters of Scottish independence who may not be necessarily supporters of the SNP, but we're in the same kind of realms here. I think they would be worried right now though that they have the most to lose, because as you're saying, it has reached peak constitutional lens. It's all anybody's talking about. And I think that there's a chance actually that it's going to put off some of the more maybe working class voters who started to believe in a different type of politics, who are feeling a bit more alienated right now, because what they were attracted to was this idea of vision, was talking of vision of the way things could be. Now it's really, it almost feels like it's all about loyalty and about sides and about and because Brexit has been a particularly nasty type of nationalism, even though Scottish nationalism isn't that, is this polar opposite of that, I think just, knowing that this is going on, it really turns people off. I think it really can turn people away from the ballot box. But the people who are going to be more committed, I think, this time compared to the last general election, are unionist voters. If you think back to the general election in 2015, you had just come out of the independence referendum.
They were very smug. They thought we've won. It's in the bag.
Exactly. And independence supporters wanted to do something. And people angry at Labour wanted to do something. So they went out and they're really motivated. They voted. The unionists maybe felt like, we've won that battle. Realising 2 years down the line that the battle hasn't been won, I feel like independence is very much on the table still, then I think that you're going to see a higher turnout maybe in those voters, and maybe you might just see a general overall fall in turnout, and I think that would probably harm the independence side more than
I think so. I mean, as well, but it's almost unthinkable. I'm a wee bit older just than you two, but when I grew up, it was almost unthinkable that anyone from a working class family in Scotland, and even most middle class, to use those terms, would ever have considered voting Tory. It was a theme. It was, you would have been hounded out of your pub. You'd have lost friendships. People would have. It was like saying you were the most awful thing. It was. It was so horrific with what the poll tax and the miners' strike and the shipyards and what Thatcher's policies did in Scotland. It was just something you would. There were a few, I'm sure, sticking about somewhere, but they would never have admitted it in open company. It was a dirty secret, even. And it was unthinkable that working class people in Scotland would have voted Tory. But the simple fact, as you say, was this lens, this constitutional lens. I think, we'll see, if you're a unionist, a committed unionist, and it has made people pick a side, and, unfortunately, is if you're a committed unionist, I mean, really, you're not going to go to Labour, you're not going to vote. Where are they going to go?
You're not going to Lib Dems either.
No, so it's, I think you're right on that stance, but obviously I'm a, independent supporter as well, strangely, but I'm hoping that people will vote with hope and vote with of hope for better, rather than, because as you say, what we did see in the Brexit votes down south was people voting for what they didn't want. We don't want immigrants, and we don't want this, and we're scared of that, and we want to batten down the hatches and go back 50 years. And I mean, they didn't really want out of Europe, in my opinion. They wanted to go back 50 years in time, to a time that didn't actually exist, or except in this rosy glow of their mind. And I hope that people will be able to say, well, what we should be doing is voting for something we want, something that we can see, something that we can dream of. And, you know, what people need to remember about Ruth Davidson, for her cuddly persona and her tanks and her giggly laughs, is that she's a Tory. You know, she's a Tory. Like, you know, she is standing there. The reason she said nothing in this Holyrood debate is because she is under the thumb of Westminster, on the one hand, or two, she believes that this is the right thing to do. They're the only two options. She's either so under the thumb that the Tory party in Scotland means nothing and they have no power. Even their leader, who is very popular, who say was meant to be the re-beginning of the Tory rising in Scotland, if she's not even allowed to speak of what she really feels about this pernicious policy, if she's not allowed to speak about it, then that says something about how Scotland and Scottish Conservatives and Scottish people are viewed again.
So do you think that the SNP is running both local election and general election? And so far, I know it's early days for the general, but do you think that they're running a strong enough campaign with that kind of vision in it to make sure that people are going to get out and vote at the ballot box? And likewise, maybe even the Greens, the Scottish Greens, of course, is the other pro-independence party in Scotland. Do you think between them they're doing enough?
I hope so, Angela. I mean, but again, you have to say as well is that the SNP is all in particular, and the Greens have both always been the reason they've worked and the reason they've enjoyed the success and the rising is because it has been a grassroots uprising of bottom up as opposed to the top down. But with that comes the fact that it's, you know, it's door to door, it's activists, it's grassroots, people come out, and you know, I was talking to one of my friends the other day, and my wee girl's only 12, and you know, she's in the last few years she's been to the ballot box with me like 9 times. You know, when I got, you know, like what, you know, like where does this, you know, it's election after election after election, and for political activists and boots on the ground, it's been tough. You know, I mean, I think there was a collective. So I think you and I even joked about this. We're like, you know, where's the gin? You know, it's like, you know, it's been this kind of
joke.
Yeah,
where's the gin?
but you know, it's like another election. I wanted a holiday. I promised my Waynes that I'd take them somewhere on a Saturday. So I think there has been this, you know, people are knackered, and we can also see through. I think most of us in political activists that are involved can see through the Tories and what they're doing. You know, is this about May giving herself a mandate that she already says she has for a policy she didn't want? Or is it to, you know, the elephant in the Tory room? Is it election fraud? Is this what this is all about?
Okay, we're actually going to come back to that in a second. But first of all, interesting point about talking about the vision. Because I think you're right. It's like if we are talking about the SNP and the Greens are putting forward it's almost a progressive vision, whereas the kind of pro-union side is actually generally very much the opposite of that. It's about what you don't want, because you don't want a referendum, or you don't want any more instability. You know, vote Theresa May for a strong and stable leader, which we're going to hear on repeat for the next couple of weeks. But coming back even just to the rape clause debate, Alison Johnston, one of the Green MSPs, made an excellent point, I felt, when addressing Ruth Davidson's point of, well, if the Scottish Government cared so much, it could just mitigate again. And Alison responded that if mitigation is the pinnacle of the Tory vision for the Scottish Parliament, what are you doing here? Yeah, and that's it. If their vision is just basically responding to what Westminster is doing rather than actually putting forward its own policy and pushing for its own agenda, then it really just shows that, I mean, they're taking the concept of unionism to the whole next level. Even these rumours of like up to 4 MSPs on their way out of Holyrood to go to Westminster. In fact, John Lamont is already away. He's gone. He said he's leaving. He's away to campaign to move to Westminster, and it's maybe if I was more cynical. No, it's just a thing of like people. I feel like sometimes the Tories have gone to Holyrood as a step to get where they actually want to, which is Westminster, because they view it not as a means to an end, but just as a means to further their career to where they're actually going to
Well,
get
exactly.
it is.
And again, you know, it is about, at the end of this election could be about which parliament do you believe is the real parliament? The one in Edinburgh, the one in London. I know what I think, and I know what I want, and I know what I'm pretty sure all of us sitting at this table and watching this is Edinburgh's the real parliament in Scotland. But it's very clear that to the Tories that's not true. And although I was very impressed with Kezia and Holyrood this week, and I'd love to see more of that, like, there's nothing pleases me more than when there is these issues, these moral standpoint issues, and people standing up and doing the right thing. The Greens doing the right thing, you know, even Kezia and the SNP, and just everybody saying this is repugnant and you know, and it's pernicious. And no, it's fantastic. It's how politics should be, because there are loads of issues that we can all believe in and all work together towards in Scotland. We believe in a different type of politics, and you know, that was, if it was never more underpinned than in the Brexit vote, we just voted differently, we believe differently, we're brought up differently, we have different cultures, and you know, we want different things. So yeah, I suppose I'd never like to think that voters are stupid, and I think people can see through this. I think people do, Andrew, it's back to what you were saying about can people, are the parties running the campaign? I think people aren't stupid. I think they can see through the Tories, and I think days like that Holyrood debate the other day, although it was the most, you know, evil thing they were discussing, there was a wee ray of hope that all these other leaders and MSPs all working together and going, no, this is where we draw the line, you know.
Just in what you were saying, you know, the idea of the Tories, MSPs looking to go to Westminster. I remember a few tweets when the general election was called about, you know, has anyone asked Ruth Davidson if she's thinking about standing? But I thought it was very telling just a month or two ago on Question Time when Ruth Davidson was on it. I don't know if either of you caught it. And I watched it with great interest. It was in Carlisle, I think. Was it Carlisle or somewhere else? I think it was somewhere in England. It wasn't in Scotland. But regardless, you wouldn't have known that Ruth Davidson was the leader of a Scottish Conservative Party, I don't think. She spoke on every issue at a UK level and barely mentioned Scotland. And I thought that's very telling, that's very reflective of how the Scottish Conservative Party actually sees Scotland's place within the Union. They do see it in that much more, which I would think is old Scotland, because 97 the Parliament came in, I was 11. I only really remember the Scottish Parliament. I don't really remember a time before it. And that's important for young people in Scotland, because they actually do only recognise this current situation that we have, whereas older people and maybe older Tories would, I suspect, quite happily just go back to the way that things were before. And it makes me wonder, are we taking devolution far too much for granted right now, assuming that what we have now can't be taken away? And I don't think that we're talking enough about that. I think speaking about it would almost be ridiculed at the moment as sort of paranoid conspiracy theory, tinfoil hat stuff. I'm not sure about that, and I base that on the behaviours that we're seeing from some of the Scottish Conservative MSPs. And I think that seeing people like John Lamont say that they're going to jump into Westminster at the first opportunity, that to me was another alarm bell going off, thinking there is very little interest in Scotland.
Yeah, you couldn't be more right. You couldn't be more right. They're coming for us, Angela, in my opinion. And I don't care if I'm bring the tinfoil hat full on. I think they're coming for us because someone did live through, you know, and watched the Scottish. We talked about this before. The Scottish executive called. They didn't even want to have a proper name, Parliament or government. And having lived through that, I think they're coming for us. You know, I really do. And if Theresa is, as all polls predict, is returned to Westminster with a massive mandate, I think we can see steps. And already the language around powers are going to be brought back, if you like, from they have to sit in their correct place. It's all fluffy language, but you've got to read between the lines of what they're actually saying, and what it seems to me is that what the Conservative Party feel always, and at least in some ways they're honest about it, you know, the Conservative and Union Party, but what they really mean is England, Westminster, and the power to reside in their grubby paws to do with as they will. So I don't think you could be more spot on.
Yeah, and I think that tone that we're getting from Ruth Davidson recently as well, I've noticed a change in that. It's far more aggressive, noticeably more aggressive than it was before, and it's very much a Conservative and Unionist Party, know your place. Yeah. That's what that's saying to me. And if you start handing over to it, I think that's actually going to increase. I think we're going to get more of that kind of bullish attitude of you have been defeated.
Yeah, the friendly
and you are
stripped away.
So I would just say, you know, let's not be taking things for granted. Yeah. There might be a few fights in the horizon that we didn't really see coming.
If you're looking at like the Brexit process itself as well, what you're talking about, this kind of rhetoric around making sure that power sits at the right levels of government is, I mean, that's already riding roughshod over basically the kind of agreement between the two parliaments. Is legally bound that
isn't reserved is automatically devolved. And if they're tough to start, they just, well, we'll just take this power back here, and you can have maybe half of this one, and we'll take a wee bit of that one. It's already raiding Russia over what's already been agreed.
Yeah.
And I don't necessarily think they're going to come closed in the Parliament, but at the same time, they're almost kind of showing their hand here of also not really bothering to respect the actual agreement between the two parliaments in the first place, and that is concerning. Regardless of how far you think it will or will not go, that is still a concerning thing that is happening right now, which is just that they are still playing it as if it isn't a devolved dominion or a devolved parliament, but still just a branch of Westminster that they can just pick and choose what comes and what stays.
Almost like a great big office that they can send the stuff that they can't really be bothered dealing with too. I mean, I would like to see the Scottish Parliament, yeah, absolutely, I would like to see them be a little bit more bold. Just push the envelope with the powers we do have to be. It was Leslie Riddick was talking last night about we should possibly be, she would like to see the fishing policies of pushing the envelope a wee bit and just going and speaking to other neighbouring nation states on fishing policy and just the powers we have, just push because, what that might help in two ways, because one, we get more power, we get more power and we get great agreements for making Scotland a better land and have better neighbours. But on the other side of it is we'll soon see what's happening with our cuddly caring face if they start to push back and think, oh no, you come back, you can't do that. And I think what we have to do is try and cut through the fluffy language. The Tories are not caring, they're not cuddling, they're not kind, they're not aspirational. They are cruel people that don't care about women who've been. They don't care that children are hungry. They don't care about food banks. They want to preserve the order as is, which has always been the way of capitalism. Is people at the top need people at the very bottom to service them, and that's the truth and that's the reality. And I think in Scotland, with Ruth's very great media persona, somehow we've managed to forget that. Mustn't forget it. Forget it at our peril.
Okay, let's bring in a couple of comments from people at home. Peter Mertich.
Any devolved government worth its salt has to push for more powers. And having agreed that some devolution is good, there's no arbitrary line that can be drawn to say this far and no more. And Mary White is talking about how they remember the time before Holyrood. It was horrible, and I never actually voted in general elections because they saw it as pointless. And I can get behind that because the Westminster voting system is awful.
Yeah.
The first past the post it basically keeps either Labour or the Tories in power. And it takes away any real agency for change when you have two parties that are just basically replacing one another every couple of years. And the fact that both of them are against proportional representation kind of tells you all you need to know about them wanting to remain in power. It's very frustrating.
Privilege always wants to keep power, doesn't it?
I mean, that's the way of it.
It's very frustrating in the referendum to change it. People overwhelmingly voted against changing it as well.
Oh, for the AV referendum?
Yeah.
I think the kind of failure of the AV referendum there was it didn't really set out what it was doing particularly well.
Yeah, it was quite confusing.
There was a lot of confusion. It wasn't well argued.
And I also think with AV it was really proper proportional representation as well. It just kind of fell down all areas, and the unfortunate outcome of that was the kind of powers that be, rather than saying, oh, people don't want AV or the alternative vote system, they just went, people don't want proportional representation.
Well, that's it. There's more than one way to skin a cat. There's proportional representation can be very, very well or very, very complicated, as we've seen it all. And as you say, it's a vote of they don't like any of it, and that's a nonsense.
That is nonsense.
Terrible that referendum was, divided the whole country.
Divisive.
Actually, I think that was the start of it all.
That's it.
Yeah.
So we have a referendum.
Was the AV
Divided.
It was the Lib Dems that did it.
But what's wrong with being divisive? I love the word divisive. The real problem in politics is when everyone agrees. Kind of South Korea style. Divisive is a great thing. You should be able to talk.
It's as if we never had an argument before, isn't it? It was just harmonious Britain before the Scottish independence referendum.
We all voted for the same political party. We all were on the same page about everything.
That's the real terrifying thing. If people are all walking about, Stepford voters. No, there's always been division. The Labour Party. When Kezia says division, divisive, I feel like screaming at the telly. The Labour Party was founded on division. The great Labour Party was men of Maclean and Max, brilliant men, Keir Hardie. It was founded on division. It was a protest group within the Liberal Party. They've forgotten this. It should be about division. It should be about people getting engaged and fighting and arguing their points and passionately pleading. I want to see young people being like that. I love it.
Love to.
And all great achievements in history. All moves of taking power away from those with privilege has always been branded as divisive. And we see it even now with like the Black Lives Matter movement in America.
Yeah.
People like, oh, can you just be a wee bit quieter, please? It's like, oh yeah, no, don't mind us over here just being shot for doing nothing. Like, and it's almost like this. Oh well, you know, you're kind of causing a bit of a disturbance for me and my kind of quiet life. It's a wild idea that people should just quieten down and accept things for what they are, rather than causing a little bit of division every now and then. But speaking of the proportional representation systems, let's move on to the local elections, which of course is a proportional vote. So for anyone who doesn't know, the Westminster voting system is first past the post, which is whoever gets the most votes wins, which means that the Tories can be elected on about 27% of the vote across the whole of the country, which they are.
Sounds fair.
Yep. The Holyrood voting system is a semi-proportional one, which is the additional member system, which is half first past the post and half another thing which stocks people up in the lists, so it creates a fairer skew of representation. And for the local elections, we have a third one called STV, or the single transferable vote. And that creates, again, an even more proportional representation in the local councils. And the way it works, which you'll be doing very soon if you are going out to vote, which you should be.
Better go and
Vote.
Instantly, you know.
Go vote. Is you go into the booth and you've got all your candidates there, and then you mark them in order of preference, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, however many. And then through complicated maths, which I could explain right now, but I feel like people would be bored as anything. Long story short, it works.
That's what I could just go to the
It works. Yeah, I am going to be doing a video with this. But long story short, it works out that it finds a kind of balance, and what you get at the end of it is candidates that tend to represent what most people wanted, a fair split. Now, one of the things that's really interesting, and one of the things Leslie Riddick as well was talking about, is the fact that if when you're doing your numbering of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, if you just go like 1, 2, 3, and then stop, if you don't get those first two candidates, or rather when they're rejigging things around as well, you have no say over who comes after that. So it could be the Tories getting the next one. However, if you rank the Tories at the very bottom, you're more likely to take away the opportunity for them to be elected. So when you are going into the local elections, you don't just have the opportunity to vote for who you want to see in power, you've got the opportunity to rank those who you don't want to see as far away from power as possible. And I think it's something we should be talking about, which again is why the local elections are so important, and also understanding how they work is very important as well.
Because it is counterintuitive, isn't it? We were talking about this in the office yesterday. You tend to think that no vote is better than actually giving someone a vote, because that seems like an endorsement of sorts. And then I was saying, you take it a step further, then, what if UKIP are standing local candidates? You've got to make a decision about who you would rather win.
Who's more heinous?
That
The
seat.
Tories or
And you're thinking, oh
UKIP?
God,
Clearly,
I feel very
but,
morally compromised here, having to make
dirty
these
almost,
choices.
isn't it?
So, you can see why people would be kind of naturally put off by that system. But the problem is it's just not explained well enough to people, at least if you understood exactly. Well, you don't need to understand the maths of how it works, but at least if you were a bit more settled with the fact that giving someone a vote does not necessarily, doesn't mean that you're actually improving their chances. That the whole purpose of it is you can help make it harder for the people that you really don't want to be in there by using that voting system. But I don't think people get that at all.
Also, I think what someone explained to me as well, Angela, is it's a wee bit if you only put, which, maybe if it hadn't been explained to me properly, I would have thought, just the few indie supporting people that I want in and then, walk away. But what you're then doing, I suppose, is abdicating responsibility for the rest of those councillors to someone else to decide, other voters to decide, and they might be the most rabid UKIP supporters ever, and they get to decide. So, as much as I'm not a Labour or a Lib Dem supporter, I would rather maybe an ex-Labour man a wee bit disaffected over a UKIP. So of course I want to say, I don't want to leave it to, neo-fascist to decide who gets the rest of the votes. So if you leave those blank, you're effectively saying someone else can decide the rest of who's in. So although clearly I'm going to vote for, in my case I'm going to vote SNP, etc. first and second, that my choices, and then other indie, supporting local councillors, and I'm going to look at it clearly and standing right the way down. But I'm not going to leave that for somebody else to decide, who gets those other seats.
Yeah, because you just got to remember as well that the extremists and the fascists, they're voting.
Yeah, they
And
absolutely
they're doing it in the way that's going to benefit them the most. So, we can't really be apathetic about that. But one of the things I've really been enjoying...
Don't let the fascists decide the election. I really like that line.
Yeah, don't let them get in.
Punch a fascist. No, I didn't say that.
Oh, you can't say that in life.
But one of the things I've really actually enjoyed from the local elections has been, as much as there's been all this chat about this like, Tory resurgence, they've been struggling to obviously find candidates everywhere to actually stand for them. So there's been, so far, 2 incidences of people turning up on the council ballots who had no idea that they were standing, including, amazingly in Shetland, the guy called Thomas Williamson, who upon...
Was that the council? I thought that was the general election.
No, it was council elections.
Council.
Yeah, upon discovering that he was on the list, he just said, please don't vote for me.
That's a great news story.
He doesn't want it.
Go on social media and find it. It's the best opener of a news story you'll ever see. An election candidate has pleaded for the voters not to vote for him.
And then blames it on, quote, the buggers down south, who apparently phoned him and on a bad line he maybe or maybe did not agree to stand, as no one really knows.
Wonderful story. The
really
journalist
tickles
that
me.
wrote that must have just been delighted when he got hold of that one.
But just the best part being that after the whole story with Thomas came forward, now there has been like a second Tory candidate who also was like, who only found out that they were on the list when someone got in touch with them to ask him about it. Like, same basic deal. And of course the point of it is just to kind of increase the Tory share across the whole of the country. So they can turn around and keep pointing at the story of the Tory resurgence. That's why they're kind of fielding these paper candidates, is to keep giving, at the very least, the illusion of a continuing movement towards the Conservative Party in Scotland, despite the fact that historically, or at least since Thatcher period of time, they've really struggled to gain ground. Any other good stories from the local elections anyone has?
No, I mean, I honestly feel like the local elections have been overshadowed, and it's a shame because there's actually been some really interesting candidates that are going to be standing. I think there was someone from Castlemilk against austerity in Glasgow, and people like Rosa Sally, she's standing for,
she's
for local
great.
council as well.
Standing out.
Yeah, and I mean, there will be examples of things like this all over the country of really kind of local and grassroots campaigners trying to do their thing for the community, and they're just not going to get the coverage and the attention. It's certainly like Common Space, you know, we had lots of ideas of things that we wanted to do for the local elections, but because a general election's just
Cold. We've such a small team. We don't have the resources to do 2 things.
And I think that even though we're a very small team, you might have bigger
Newspapers and operations across the country,
but even at that, they're still going to struggle to give both the attention that they need. So at Common Space,
we're very keen on balance as well. We want to try and make sure that we do as much across the board as we can, because we're non-party political. We don't back political parties. That makes it even harder though, because you have to try and make sure you're giving people a flavour of everything. So it's very tricky, and it's a shame for the local council elections because they're just not going to get the kind of prominence that they deserve.
What it is me as well, though, you're great at it, and strangely, it seems to people even out as the Lord candidate last year and political activists, when you're out in the doors, what people are actually talking about all the time, what actually affects their day-to-day, is all things that are run and organised by councils. So although people hear the big ticket items all the time on Question Time and news and kind of Theresa's May's and even, you know, our First Minister and Kezia and Corbyn, it's all the big issues. But what people actually care about is, you know, Mrs McClumphy's bins up the road, and why, you know, this has not been moved, and the primary school, and why there's no traffic lights at the end of the road towards the swing. But these are real issues that affect real lives, and I would really like people to get more excited about their communities. I think, you know, councils should be smaller areas. I think the budget should be more localised, and you know, and more accountability. And I'd like to see people get really involved in the community, because actually, it's one of those things. I think maybe as you get older, you start to like your neighbours and want your own wee bit, a garden in front of your house, nice and wee Christmas tree, whatever it is that turns you on about your community. But I think you start to realise this is actually what matters in the day. Of course, the big issues of austerity and our NHS, they absolutely matter. But strangely, when you're talking to people that are not that politically active on the doors, what they care about is the issues that their councillors can change for them and can help. And a change in council can absolutely, totally change how things are run. So I want people to get more excited and get out and vote for, you know, read it, talk to them, go along to a few meetings. You know, every single candidate, I think, in these council elections has got Facebook pages. Message them, ask them, talk to them, but get involved, get excited. Don't let Theresa May distract you.
Yeah, no, because I wonder, because I was speaking to Cass McGregor, who's the Green Council candidate in the Govan Hill area recently, and she was focusing, like her kind of, I guess one of the areas she's focusing on is housing in Govan Hill, which is a real problem. The landlord situation is dire. basically rogue landlords who are kind of running over everyone and just piling folk into flats and abusing the system. And that's one of the main issues facing Government Hill. But at the same time, the flyer I got through my door from the Labour Party was the vote for us to stop a referendum. And I can't help but wonder, like, about the people who are like living in this kind of crappy situation and who then gets that flyer through, who are like, what are you doing for me? Like, well, you want to stand and represent me, but you're not talking about what actually is important to me right now, like, of what's affecting me in this local area. And it's like this like freaking thing about the constitutional lens of just sort of skewing politics away from what's affecting us on a day-to-day basis.
What you do want, not for, as you say, you want to hear what they're going to do to make your life, your area, your community better, and all they're saying is no to your referendum, back in your box.
Yeah,
you know, like.
Okay, right, let's bring it back to the I was going to say the real election. No, that's not true. No, actually, local elections are genuinely so important. And just to follow up really quickly on your point, give me a wink. There's stuff like dig out your hole, Stephen. It is interesting that Scotland has some of the worst council sizes in Europe. Like the number of people that our councils are meant to look after is astounding, and it's something we should definitely be addressing. I think one of the reasons people aren't necessarily looking to bring in more councillors is because at the moment everyone looks at the councils and doesn't see them doing a very good job. So once we've got councils doing a good job, then we can start talking about bringing more power to the right areas, I think, is the way a few folk are looking at it. But coming back to the general election, one of the things that the Tory party have been accused of, which we talked about earlier on, has been this idea that they have called this general election not necessarily to strengthen their mandate for Brexit, but rather because the Tory election fraud story is kind of rumbling on, and the Tory party doesn't have a necessarily very big majority in Westminster at the moment, and the Tory election fraud scandal could potentially have caused serious damage to the Tory party. They could have lost a big chunk of the majority. I don't think it went as far as losing all of it, but definitely enough that it would have been very difficult for them if they ever found any issue that the Tory party were a little bit split on to actually be able to push it through. And if the MPs who are under investigation, as far as I know, had been convicted in the near future, they would have had to step down and they would have been disbarred from standing again, which would have continued to have made a bit of a mess of things for the Tory party. Whereas by calling this, they're managing to effectively sidestep around that a little bit and just sort of get over it and increase the majority to the point that even if any of those MPs do go down, they're still going to be very safe, according to recent polling. I mean, Suzanne, do you think that's the reason why we're facing this election just now?
Yeah. I mean, also I think that Theresa May's quite mad, and she just, you know, I watched her through a lens for years and years and years, and she's accomplished it. She's a politician, you know, all her adult life, most of her adult life certainly, and she just says whatever it is. Maybe she's not alone in that, but she says whatever it takes to get elected, you know. And I've called her Prime Minister maybe, and you know, there's all these jokes been flying around the internet and everything about, you know, she's doing that. She's calling on an election to get through this policy that she doesn't even want. Like, I don't know, it's a win-win for her, you know, so it's incomprehensible to think that she could lose this, but if she does, it's someone else's problem, and she walks away saying, I told you so, you know, and if she wins, she's got a massive mandate. But yeah, I think it's about let's be realistic. This hasn't happened accidentally, you know, it's just relatively recently she was saying there will be no election before, I will tell you, you know, there will be no election before 2020, blah, blah, blah. Oh, here's an election. It is absolutely about this.
The honest answer is I don't know if it is the reason. Theresa May and the Conservative Party would have known about Tory election fraud when she was saying that there was going to be no election.
That's true.
You know, this has been rumbling in the background for quite a while now. And so I understand that the Tories have already been fined for not playing things according to the rules, but this has now proceeded to a potential criminal investigation, which could lead to something else. Now, I don't know, because I can't remember examples of this happening before in this kind of scale, but it seems to me like it would be very unusual
for this to really proceed into something majorly criminal. And the reason I say that is just because I think back to Alistair Carmichael. It happened with him when people tried to use the law to kind of oust him from his seat because he had lied during the election campaign after the whole French Nicola Sturgeon fiasco. Now, if you remember, people donated a lot of money to the crowdfunder to help the Orkney Four with their legal fund to do that. And they've so many people thought this is to be open and shut case. This has to be man lied. He did this.
And he admitted it.
He admitted it. But actually, when you look at the legal stuff, when you look into the loopholes, and you look into the way the law's written, it's a lot harder to do that. And I think part of the reason is because the institutions of the Parliament and the justice system and democracy and all of these things, I think they probably put barriers in the way of it to be hold all the time. So it's just with that in mind that I wonder how likely it is that it will proceed to something more substantial where you actually see basically that you know, I'm always sceptical with these things, and I think that the public get angry about that, and I agree. I think that they're right to be angry about it, but I just generally don't have faith in these systems to work for the benefit of the public in the way that they should, I'm sad to say. So it's on the basis of that I don't actually know how worried the Tories are about Tory election fraud, and that's the truth. I don't know. I think a lot of people are... if you're not a Tory supporter, then this is... I can see the temptation of just saying it's all about Tory election fraud and it's a con, it's corruption, it's all of these things. I'm just saying it might not entirely be that. It could just be that Theresa May's looking at the polls and saying they are going to destroy Labour.
Well, actually...
If these figures are right.
If you're looking at...
And it gives them another 5 years in office. It's... as you say, it increases the majority, it gives the mandate, it gives Theresa May, who must be getting bugged by constantly being told that she's unelected, because of course she took over from David Cameron. She may just have looked at it and thought, right, the opportunity's there. If I have to call an election at some point, then there's no better time to call it than right now, where it's an absolute guaranteed walkover.
Well, you're saying it's an absolute guaranteed walkover, but most recent YouGov polling, within 1 week, went from Labour 24-point lead between them and the Conservatives. In a single week, went to 16 points. So they actually managed to claw back a substantial amount in a very short period of time.
But is it dependent on the polling, though? I'm very sceptical.
Well, it's YouGov in both instances.
But we're living in a time of political perversity. We all went to our bed thinking we'd wake up to President Clinton. You know, and look what happens. It's political...
Or to Brexit.
Or to Brexit.
Not happening, or
you know, it's a time... Oh, my God. You know...
Well, I mean, the thing is, because we are seeing surges... We saw it in France there with the election. Jean-Luc Mélenchon, who's a left-wing candidate, had a kind of late surge as well. I think that, yes, we absolutely could see something like a late surge for Corbyn. It's possible. But that doesn't necessarily mean that Theresa May was making her gamble based on that. So she may not be factored in that. She may not be taking Corbyn seriously at all. So we don't know. I agree that it's silly to write it off, and I think John Curtis has said similar to that as well, that you shouldn't just be assuming here that you know exactly how this is going to go. We're not in normal political times.
You know, she's made one of the things that annoys me the most, and it's not even really been talked about, you know, like... You know, the set time Parliament rule, you know, which was a Tory policy, and you know, she's made a mockery of democracy and Purda for local elections. Again, another example of don't do as I do as I say, and the Tory policy. I mean, it is absolutely shocking. It's an affront to democracy. It's an affront to decency to hold a general election now because it suits you, and because you think so. I think maybe that's why she's even in our party fudging the issues around it. It's because you may very well be right, and she just thinks that's when I'm going to get the biggest number of MPs returned. I'm doing it, and to hell with everything I've said previously about fixed term parliaments. So. It's an affront to democracy, and any Democrat should be shouting.
Theresa May just putting the mock in democracy, and that brings us to the end of the show on that bombshell. But I mean, how great would it be if it did turn out that Theresa May throws this thing for this political gain, and then we end up with like Prime Minister Corbyn in a couple of weeks? That would be stunning.
It would
be stunning.
If there's any time where something like that could happen, we're in
now is it.
This is the time. This is the time.
Make it happen. Make it be so, voters. Make it be so.
But that does bring us to the end of this show. So thank you to everyone who tuned in, watched, and commented down below, and for sharing. And thank you also to both of my guests for joining me in the studio today. We will be back again next week at 3 p.m. as we are every Thursday to talk about everything that happens from now until then. If you did miss the show and you're tuning in at the very end, you can go ahead onto iTunes and find the Blether Thegither podcast, because we are now putting it out there as a podcast. Tell your friends and your family. Basically, get out there. That would be really nice. But other than that, guys, thank you to everyone who tuned in and took part. We will see you all again next week. Bye. Bye.